The void between stars does not care about empires. It does not care about councils or constitutions or the ambitions of species who think they own eternity. The void simply waits patient and cold until those who venture into it learn what they truly are. On this day, in a stretch of empty space called the Cathara Rift, 10,000 warships were about to learn. The council fleet hung in formation like a wall of steel and fire. Their Rellan dreadnoughts anchored the center, each one 5 kilometers of gleaming black metal, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Melkari's swift ships screened the flanks, elegant and deadly. Sereth battle fortresses lumbered behind, nearly indestructible, their bulk reassuring to the commanders who had never lost a war in 12,000 years. At the heart of it all, aboard the flagship, absolute certainty over mind, Kelvithus processed tactical data through 10,000 eyes. The Thorellan hive mind saw everything, calculated everything, and everything told it the same story. This would be over quickly. 2,000 human ships floated ahead in what looked like chaos. No formation, no defensive screen, no obvious command structure. To every council strategist watching, they looked like amateurs who had stumbled into a fight they could not win. Kelvithus ordered the attack. The first wave of plasma fire tore through space, brilliant and terrible, converging on the coordinates where the human fleet had been seconds before. Where they had been. Because in the time it took light to cross the distance, in that 1.7 seconds between firing solution and impact, 2,000 human corvettes simply ceased to exist. The council sensors showed nothing. Empty space. Target lost. And then before anyone could process what they were seeing, the humans reappeared. Not ahead, not behind, inside. 2,000 ships materialized throughout the council formation. Among the dreadnoughts, between the escorts, behind the flagships, so close that the proximity alarms had no time to sound before weapons fire lit up the void. The human corvettes poured fire into hulls from angles no shield had ever been designed to cover. Point blank, surgical, devastating, and then they were gone again. Blink, reappeared somewhere else. Fire, gone. On the bridge of the Defiance, a small human corvette that had materialized 60 meters from a Thorellan dreadnought's engine cluster, Admiral James Okoye sat perfectly still in his command chair. His hands rested on the armrest, steady as stone. Around him, his crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Okoye himself barely moved at all. His tactical officer called out shield strength. His weapons officer confirmed target locks. His helmsman executed another slip space jump with the casual ease of someone parallel parking. Okoye simply watched the displays and trusted his people. 2,000 ships, 2,000 captains, each one thinking for themselves, each one finding opportunities and exploiting them in real time. The council fleet's coordination collapsed in minutes, and somewhere 50 years in the past, this moment had already been decided. It had been decided by one woman standing alone who had looked at the entire galaxy and said one simple word: no. The Grand Convocation Chamber was the largest room humanity had ever seen. It hung in space around a dead star called Valtheris Prime, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that stretched wider than Earth's moon. Inside, rising up in tiers that seemed to climb forever into darkness, sat the representatives of 400 alien species. Some were tall and thin like living needles. Some were made of crystalline structures that caught the light and split it into colors that human eyes could barely perceive. Some floated in tanks of liquid that cycled through bioluminescent patterns. Some had no bodies at all, existing only as patterns of light and thought projected into their designated spaces. Together, they were the Galactic Council. They had ruled the stars for longer than human civilization had existed. They had seen species rise and fall. They had witnessed empires burn and cultures fade. They had built a system of laws and lanes and controlled commerce that kept the galaxy stable, ordered, and under their absolute authority. At the very bottom of this enormous chamber, standing on a circle of white light, no bigger than a dinner table, was Eleanor Hart. She was 26 years old. She had dark hair that she wore pulled back, sharp brown eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of posture that came from years of ballet lessons her mother had insisted on. She wore a simple black suit with a small blue pin on her collar, showing the flag of the United Earth Coalition. She carried no weapons. She had no guards. She had no translator device because the chamber provided that service automatically. She stood completely alone on that circle of light, with 400 species and looking down at her from every direction. And she did not look afraid. She was afraid, of course. She would have been a fool not to be. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands wanted to shake, so she kept them clasped behind her back where no one could see. The sheer scale of the chamber pressed down on her like physical weight. But Eleanor Hart had learned early in her diplomatic career that fear was something you kept on the inside. What you showed on the outside was what people remembered. So she showed them calm. She showed them confidence. She showed them a human being who believed she belonged here. The protocol master, a Jalindri official whose species had managed council ceremonies since before humans had discovered fire, activated the translation system. Its voice emerged from everywhere and nowhere, neutral and precise. The chamber recognizes Ambassador Eleanor Hart of the human species. The ambassador may address the council. Eleanor took a breath. Thank you. It is an honor to stand before this assembly. A ripple went through the tiers. Not agreement, not disagreement, just the motion of 400 species shifting slightly like a forest responding to wind. She had prepared a speech. She had memorized arguments and statistics and historical precedents. She had practiced in front of mirrors and cameras and her daughter's stuffed animals. She did not get to deliver any of it. The Melkari delegate rose from its seat high above. It looked like a praying mantis sculpted from blue glass, and when it spoke, the translation system turned its voice into something flat and emotionless. The Melkari consensus has reviewed the application of the species known as humans. We have concerns. Eleanor kept her face neutral. We welcome the opportunity to address any concerns. Your species has existed for approximately 300,000 years, the Melkari said. In that time, you have fought over 40,000 wars among yourselves. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your own planet. You have driven countless other species on your homeworld to extinction. You have polluted your atmosphere, poisoned your oceans, and repeatedly come within moments of annihilating your entire civilization. The Melkari paused. Its crystalline structure caught the light and scattered it across Eleanor's face. And you wish to join us? Another ripple through the chamber. This one felt different, darker, like the drawing of a collective breath before a verdict. Eleanor chose her words carefully. Humanity has made mistakes. We do not deny that, but we have also learned from those mistakes. We have united our world. We have reached the stars. You have not united your world. The voice came from a different section. Urathi representatives, floating gas beings that pulsed with orange light. You still maintain separate nations, separate governments, separate military forces. You cannot even agree among yourselves on basic matters of resource distribution. How can you be trusted to participate in galactic affairs? More voices joined in. Species after species rose to speak. The Valari, who communicated through bioluminescent patterns. The Sereth, massive stone-like beings who had not fought a war in 6 million years. The Jalindri, so ancient they had watched Earth's first fish crawl onto land. For 2 hours, Eleanor stood on her circle of light and listened to 400 species explain why humanity was not ready. Not civilized enough, not peaceful enough, not trustworthy enough. She answered when she could. She stayed calm when the insults came. She kept her voice steady and her chin up. She represented every human being alive, and she would not give these beings the satisfaction of seeing her break. And then Overmind Kelvithus spoke. The Thorellan hegemony sat at the very top of the chamber in a section larger and more elevated than any other. Thousands of insectoid bodies, each about the size of a large dog, their black shells gleaming under the chamber lights, their eyes glowing with that faint green luminescence that Eleanor had learned meant they were all connected to the same consciousness. When Kelvithus spoke, every other voice in the chamber went silent. The Council has heard sufficient testimony. The words came through the translator, cold and precise, like a machine reading a death sentence. The application of the human species for membership is denied. Eleanor had expected this. She had prepared for this, but hearing it spoken aloud in this enormous room still hurt more than she had thought it would. She took a breath. May I ask on what grounds? On the grounds that your species is unfit, Kelvithus said. You are violent, fractured, unpredictable, and dangerously creative. You do not conform to the established patterns of civilized development. You are in the assessment of this council a threat. The word hung in the air like smoke. However, Kelvithus continued, the council is not without mercy. We recognize that your species is young. You may yet be guided toward acceptable behavior. Therefore, we offer you an alternative to full membership. Something cold settled in Eleanor's stomach. What alternative? The compliance protocols. The chamber stirred. Several delegates shifted in their seats. A few of the younger species exchanged glances that even Eleanor could read as uncomfortable. Under the compliance protocols, Kelvithus said, your species will surrender all military vessels and weapon systems to the Council for disposal. Your population will undergo neural harmonization, a process that will reduce aggressive impulses and suppress destabilizing tendencies, such as excessive individualism and creative deviation. A Thorellan guidance cast will be installed on your homeworld to oversee your development for a probationary period of 500 standard years. At the end of this period, your application for membership will be reconsidered. 500 years, reconsidered, not approved. Eleanor's mind raced. Neural harmonization. She had read about this in the restricted files Earth intelligence had managed to acquire. The Council had used it before on species they considered too troublesome, too different. It did not kill you. It did something worse. It rewired your brain, smoothed out the rough edges, took away the anger, the stubbornness, the wild creative spark that made you who you were. And it replaced all of that with compliance, with obedience, with the quiet contentment of a species that no longer had the capacity to question or resist or dream of something better. The species that underwent harmonization still existed technically. They just stopped being interesting. They stopped being themselves. Eleanor thought about her daughter. Mira was 4 years old. She loved dinosaurs and finger painting and asking questions that had no answers. What would neural harmonization do to that little girl? What would it do to every child like her? She thought about the musicians and artists and engineers and poets and everyone who made humanity messy and difficult and gloriously stubbornly alive. 500 years of that fire being slowly methodically extinguished. She looked up at Kelvithus. Those green eyes looked back without warmth, without cruelty, without anything at all. To the Overmind, this was not personal. Humanity was simply a problem to be managed. And if we refuse, Eleanor asked. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber's acoustics carried it to every seat. Several species flinched. Kelvithus did not flinch. If you refuse, you will be exiled. A barrier wall will be erected around your solar system. It will prevent all faster-than-light travel in or out. You will have no trade, no communication, no contact with any other species. You will be sealed within your own system until such time as the Council determines you have matured sufficiently to reconsider the compliance protocols. There will be no appeal. How long, Eleanor asked. As long as necessary. Centuries, millennia, it does not matter. The galaxy is patient. You will learn, or you will be forgotten. Eleanor looked around the chamber. 400 species, 12,000 years of galactic civilization, the most powerful political body in the history of the universe. And they were all looking at her, waiting to see what she would do. Some looked at her with pity, some with contempt, some with a distant curiosity, the way a scientist might look at a lab animal that had done something unexpected. Not one of them spoke up for her. She thought about Earth, about the 8 billion people she represented, about Mira, who wanted to be an astronaut and who asked Eleanor every night before bed when they would get to meet the aliens. She thought about what neural harmonization would do to that girl, to that dream, to every dream every human had ever had. She thought about what it meant to be human. Not the wars, not the pollution, not the mistakes. Those were real and she would not pretend otherwise. But also the music, the art, the stubborn, stupid, magnificent refusal to give up even when everything was lost. The way humans climbed mountains for no reason, built cathedrals that took centuries to finish, wrote love letters and symphonies in bad poetry. They punched above their weight in every fight they had ever been in. They kept going when any sensible species would have stopped. Some things were worth more than survival. Some things were worth more than approval. Overmind Kelvithus, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. It did not shake. It did not waver. It filled that enormous chamber like a bell. On behalf of the United Earth Coalition and on behalf of every human being alive, I must respectfully decline the compliance protocols. The chamber erupted. Voices from 100 species overlapped in shock, disbelief, outrage. Kelvithus raised a limb and silence fell again. You understand the consequences, the Overmind said. It was not a question. I do. You will be sealed behind the barrier wall. You will be alone. You will have nothing. Eleanor looked up at those cold green eyes and allowed herself a small, tired smile. We will have ourselves, she said. That has always been enough. 2 Thorellan guards escorted Eleanor out of the chamber without speaking to her. She walked through corridors of alien metal under alien lights, past alien beings who stepped aside to let her pass. She did not look back. She boarded her shuttle alone. She flew back to Earth alone. And as she crossed the threshold of human space, she felt it happen. A shudder ran through the fabric of space itself, a deep vibration that rattled the hull of her shuttle and made her teeth ache. Through the viewport, she watched as something impossible began to form. The barrier wall was activating. A faint violet light spread across the heavens, shimmering like oil on water. It was beautiful in a terrible way. It looked like the aurora borealis stretched across the entire sky, pulsing with energy that bent light and distorted stars. Eleanor pressed her hand against the viewport glass and watched humanity's prison being built around them. It lasted 3 days. On Earth, people stopped what they were doing and looked up. The violet shimmer was visible even in daylight, a second sky overlaying the first. Phones flooded with calls. News networks tried to explain what was happening. Scientists scrambled to take measurements. And then on the third day, it was gone. The sky looked normal again. The stars were back in their proper places. But everything had changed. The signals from the Galactic communication network went dead. The trade ships that had been en route to Earth turned around. The few alien merchants who had been doing business in the solar system packed up and left through special one-way corridors in the wall. Within a week, every trace of alien contact had vanished. Humanity was alone. The first year was the worst. The economy, which had been slowly integrating with galactic markets for 2 decades, went into freefall. Alien alloys vanished from supply chains. Exotic fuels that powered the newest generation of spacecraft became impossible to acquire. Medical compounds that treated diseases unique to off-world colonists dried up overnight. Factories closed. Supply lines collapsed. Prices tripled, then tripled again. On Mars, the colony of New Helsinki nearly failed when its atmospheric processors broke down and the replacement parts manufactured using alien polymers could not be sourced. 300 people came within 6 hours of suffocation before a team of engineers led by a Russian-American named Dmitry Volkov managed to jury-rig a solution using materials they could actually find. 3 people died from carbon dioxide poisoning before the fix took hold. On Titan, the situation was worse. The moon's colony had been almost entirely dependent on alien technology for its heating systems. When those systems began to fail, the colony had to be partially evacuated. 17 people died during the evacuation when a transport shuttle lost power in Titan's freezing atmosphere. Their bodies were recovered 3 days later, frozen to solid mid-scream. On Earth, riots broke out in 14 major cities. Governments blamed each other. Political alliances that had held for decades fractured overnight. 3 small wars erupted in regions that had been stable for a generation. The United Earth Coalition, which had been the closest thing humanity had to a unified government, nearly dissolved. Eleanor Hart returned to Geneva to a world in chaos. She was summoned before the coalition's emergency assembly, where hundreds of politicians and military leaders shouted questions at her. What had she done? Why had she refused? How could she make this decision for all of humanity? Did she not understand what she had condemned them to? Eleanor stood at the podium and waited for the shouting to stop. It took a long time. Even angry people eventually run out of breath. I know you are afraid, she said. I am afraid too. I know you are angry. You have every right to be. But I want you to understand something. I want you to understand what they were asking us to give up. She told them about the compliance protocols. She told them about neural harmonization in clinical detail, pulling no punches. She showed them footage that Earth intelligence had acquired from council databases. Footage of harmonized species with their dead eyes and compliant smiles, and the terrible emptiness where their spark used to be. She told them about the guidance cast and the 500 years of supervision and the fact that even after all of that, membership was not guaranteed. They were not asking anyone to join them, she said. They were asking us to stop being human. They were asking us to hand over our minds, our freedom, our identity, everything that makes us who we are in exchange for the privilege of being allowed to exist in their galaxy on their terms. She paused. The assembly was silent now. And I could not do that. I will not apologize for that. Because being human is not our weakness. It is the only thing we have that no one else in that galaxy possesses. And I would rather be locked in a cage with my mind intact than walk free as someone else's puppet. The silence stretched, and then slowly someone started clapping. Someone else joined in, then another. It built like a wave crashing through the chamber until every person in the room was on their feet, and the sound was like thunder. That night, someone spray-painted 3 words on the wall of the United Earth Coalition headquarters in Geneva. By morning, those 3 words had spread to every city on Earth, to every colony on Mars and Titan, to every station in the asteroid belt. They appeared on walls and signs, in screens and shirts. They became a greeting and a battle cry and a prayer. 3 words in dripping paint that looked like blood. Never kneel again. Eleanor saw them for the first time on her way home. She stood in front of the graffiti in the cold Geneva morning, her breath misting in the air, and felt something break open in her chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something close. She went home to her small apartment. Mira was there being watched by Eleanor's mother. The 4-year-old ran to her with arms outstretched, and Eleanor picked her up and held her tight. "Did they like us, Mommy?" Mira asked. Eleanor closed her eyes, breathed in the smell of her daughter's shampoo, felt the small heartbeat against her chest. "No, baby," she said quietly. "They didn't. Are they going to hurt us? They're going to try to make us forget who we are, but we won't let them." Mira pulled back and looked at her with those serious 4-year-old eyes that sometimes seemed far too old. "Are you scared?" Eleanor could have lied, should have lied probably, but she had just stood in front of the entire galaxy and refused to compromise on the truth. She would not start lying to her daughter now. "Yes," she said, "I'm very scared." "What are we going to do?" Eleanor looked out the window at the Geneva skyline. Somewhere up there, invisible now, but still very real, the barrier walls surrounded their entire solar system. A cage built by beings who had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They thought humanity would break. They thought isolation would teach compliance. They had no idea what they had just done. "We're going to do what humans always do," Eleanor said. She set Mira down and knelt to look her in the eyes. "We're going to find a way. We're going to build something they have never seen before. And we're going to show them that they made a mistake." "What mistake?" Eleanor smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was something in it that was hard and bright like sunlight on steel. "They locked us in a cage, sweetheart. They forgot that cages make animals clever. 5 years after the barrier wall sealed humanity inside its own solar system, something unexpected happened. Humanity started to win, not immediately, not obviously, but in laboratories and factories and shipyards scattered across Earth and Mars and the asteroid belt, something was changing. The desperation of those first terrible months had crystallized into something harder, something focused, something dangerous. Marcus Reed saw it first. He was 51 years old, a former Air Force colonel who had spent 20 years running supply chains for the Mars colonization effort. He had a shaved head that gleamed under fluorescent lights, calm gray eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of mind that could hold 10,000 moving parts in perfect alignment. Before the Excel, he had been running a mid-level logistics division. Nobody important, nobody famous, just a man who was very good at getting things where they needed to be. After the Excel, he became something else entirely. He spent 3 months locked in his apartment in Colorado Springs, reading everything. Economic reports, resource surveys, technology assessments, population projections. He read until his eyes burned and his head ached, and the patterns started to emerge from the chaos. And then he wrote 12 pages that would change everything. He called it the Soul Advancement Initiative. The document was simple, direct. It laid out 2 possible futures for humanity with brutal clarity. The first future: spend the next decades trying to survive inside the cage, ration what resources remained, stretch existing technology as far as it would go, get smaller and weaker with every passing year, until the species was so diminished that when the Council finally opened the barrier wall, there would be nothing left worth saving. The second future used the cage as a workshop. Study the barrier wall itself, learn from it, build from it. Turn isolation into advantage. Develop technology the Council had never imagined. Grow stronger in the darkness until humanity was ready to break free on its own terms. Reed sent the document to every government leader, every military commander, every scientific institution on Earth, Mars, and Titan. Most of them thought he was insane. The barrier wall had been built by a civilization that had existed for 12,000 years. It bent the fabric of space itself. How could humanity, locked inside its own tiny solar system, with its crude technology, possibly break through something like that? Reed had an answer. He stood in front of the United Earth Coalition's Strategic Planning Committee in a conference room in Geneva and delivered it with the calm certainty of a man who had done the math. Humanity went from horse-drawn carriages to nuclear weapons in less than 50 years, he said. We went from the first powered flight to landing on our moon in 66 years. Every time someone tells us something is impossible, we treat it as a challenge. And now you're asking me if we can break a wall built by aliens who've had 12,000 years to get comfortable. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. Lock the most stubborn species in the galaxy inside a box with nothing to do but think. Give us 50 years. Then ask me again if we can break the wall. The committee voted. It took 2 years of political fights and funding disputes and arguments about priorities. Some nations refused to participate. Some demanded too much control. Reed spent those 2 years in meetings that made him want to scream. But eventually, piece by piece, the Soul Advancement Initiative became real. Eleanor Hart spent those 2 years traveling. She went to every major colony, every research station, every population center that would have her. She stood in front of crowds that ranged from dozens to thousands and told them the same thing. They wanted us to give up who we are. We said no. Now we have to prove that no meant something. She was good at this, better than she had expected. The speeches came naturally now. The way to read a crowd, the way to find the story they needed to hear and give it to them. On Mars, she stood in the new Helsinki Memorial Plaza where they had built a monument to the 3 people who had died during the atmospheric crisis. The names were carved in black stone: Marcus Adeyemi, age 62, Sarah Okonkwo, age 41, Dmitry Volkov Jr., age 19. Eleanor placed her hand on the cold stone and spoke to the 200 people gathered there. They died because we didn't have the parts we needed, because we had depended on alien technology we didn't understand. That will never happen again. Not because we're going back to the council, but because we're going to build something better than anything they ever gave us. She meant every word. Back on Earth, she balanced the travel with being a mother. Mira was 9 now, old enough to understand more than Eleanor sometimes wished. Old enough to ask hard questions. "Are we going to die in here?" Mira asked one night before bed. Eleanor sat on the edge of her daughter's bed in their small Geneva apartment. Through the window, she could see the lights of the city, and beyond them, the stars that humans could no longer reach. "No," Eleanor said. "We're going to find a way out." "How?" "I don't know yet, but people much smarter than me are working on it." Mira was quiet for a moment. Then, "When we get out, will they try to change us again?" Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. Her daughter was 9 years old and already thinking in terms of resistance and survival. "What kind of childhood was this?" "Probably," Eleanor said. "But we'll be ready for them." "Good." Mira rolled over, pulling her blanket up. Her voice was already getting sleepy. "I don't want to be changed. I like who I am." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead and turned out the light. In the darkness, she made a silent promise. To Mira, to every child like her, whatever it took, humanity would break free. And when they did, they would still be themselves. In Buenos Aires, a materials scientist named David Correa stood in his laboratory and stared at the broken fragments of alien alloy samples that were all he had left of galactic trade. He could have mourned what was lost. Instead, he asked a different question. What were these alloys made of? How did they work at the molecular level? And could humanity make something better using nothing but resources found in the solar system? 6 months later, his team had developed a new class of composite materials. They were not as elegant as the alien originals. They were crude and rough around the edges. But they were stronger, cheaper, and they could be manufactured anywhere. Within a year, those composites were being used in spacecraft hulls, in medical implants, and construction frames. Within 2 years, they were better than the alien alloys had ever been. This was the pattern, everywhere, in every field. The loss of alien technology did not cripple humanity. It set humanity free. For 20 years, human scientists and engineers had been using alien tools without fully understanding them. They had been consumers, not creators. The barrier wall changed that. Now they had no choice but to understand everything from the ground up. And humans, it turned out, were very good at understanding things from the ground up. Eleanor watched the breakthroughs accumulate like a rising tide. Energy, manufacturing, medicine, agriculture. One after another, the problems that had seemed insurmountable in those first terrible months began to crack open. She traveled to Kyoto to tour a new research facility. The director, a young physicist named Kira Tanaka, showed her around with the kind of quiet intensity that reminded Eleanor of herself. Tanaka was 32 years old, small and precise, with dark eyes that saw connections other people missed. She had been studying theoretical physics at the University of Texas when the barrier wall went up, working on questions about the nature of space-time that nobody thought would ever have practical applications. The barrier wall changed that too. "Come see," Tanaka said, leading Eleanor to a lab that looked more like a telescope control room. Banks of monitors displayed data in patterns Eleanor could not begin to interpret. "What am I looking at?" Eleanor asked. "The barrier wall." Tanaka pulled up an image that showed the faint shimmer of energy at the edge of the solar system. We've been mapping it. Every fluctuation, every ripple, every tiny variation in its gravitational signature. Bon Whitey. Tanaka turned to her with a smile that was part excitement, part something that looked like awe. Because they didn't just build a wall ambassador, they built us a textbook. Eleanor leaned forward. Explain. The wall works by folding dimensions in on themselves, creating a kind of knot in space-time that prevents faster-than-light travel. To most scientists, that's just an obstacle. But if you study it closely enough, if you measure it precisely enough, you can see exactly how dimensional folding works. They showed us. They probably didn't mean to, but they showed us. Showed us what? Tanaka's smile widened. How to do it ourselves. The implications hit Eleanor like a physical blow. You're saying, I'm saying the council uses lane-based FTL, fixed corridors in space, like trains on tracks. But if we can fold space ourselves, Tanaka gestured at the monitors, we don't need their lanes, we can go anywhere. Eleanor stared at the data displays. She did not understand the mathematics, but she understood what it meant. Hope, real concrete scientific hope. How long, she asked. Tanaka's smile faded slightly. To prove the theory, maybe 5 years. To build something that actually works, I don't know. Decades, maybe. Keep working, Eleanor said. Whatever you need, I'll make sure you get it. She meant that too. 10 years passed. Mira turned 14, already showing an aptitude for engineering that reminded Eleanor of the scientists working on the Sol Initiative. She talked constantly about building ships, she said, the kind that could take humanity anywhere. Eleanor watched her daughter sketch spacecraft designs in notebooks and build models from scrap materials with the same fierce determination she had shown at 4 years old asking about the aliens. Some things did not change. Eleanor herself turned 36. The gray had started to show in her hair. The lines around her eyes had deepened. She still traveled, still gave speeches. But more and more her role was changing. She was becoming a symbol. The woman who had said no to the galaxy. The woman who had chosen freedom over safety. She was not sure how she felt about that. In the deep asteroid belt, in a region so dense with rock and dust that it was effectively invisible to any outside observation, Marcus Reed was building something that would make the galaxy tremble. He was 61 now. His hair had gone completely white. His hands shook slightly when he was tired, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and he had made a decision that kept him awake at night. He was building a war fleet. Reed was not a violent man. He had spent his entire life in logistics, not combat. But he understood something that many others did not want to face. When humanity broke through the barrier wall, the Council would notice. A species that was supposed to be locked away forever, suddenly free and roaming the galaxy with a drive system the Council did not have and could not control. That was not something the Council would accept quietly. Humanity needed to be ready. The fleet was built in secret. Von Neumann machines, self-replicating robots that could mine asteroids and process raw materials and build copies of themselves, worked around the clock. They ate rock and turned it into warships. 200 combat vessels, each one small, fast, and agile. Not the massive dreadnoughts that the Council's senior species favored. Humanity did not have the resources or experience for that. Instead, they built something different. Wraith-class corvettes, built around the slip space drive that Tanaka's team was developing. Ships that could appear anywhere, strike hard, and vanish before the enemy could react. Ships that did not depend on a central command structure, but could operate independently. Each one a self-contained fighting unit. Alongside the warships, they built colony ships, 1,000 of them. Big, slow, sturdy vessels packed with everything a group of humans would need to start a new civilization on a new world. These ships were not weapons. They were seeds. Admiral James Okoye inspected the flagship on the day it was commissioned. He was 58 years old, a career Navy officer with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. The ship was called Defiance. Okoye stood on its bridge and looked out at the fleet assembled in the asteroid belt. 200 warships gleaming in the distant sunlight. 1,000 colony ships waiting in the shadows. They said we couldn't do this, his tactical officer said. They were wrong, Okoye replied. But the fleet was only part of the story. While Reed built ships in the asteroid belt, other humans were doing something the Council had not predicted. They were leaving, slowly, carefully, a few ships at a time spread out over years. They used the slip space drive that Tanaka's team had perfected after 49 years of study. They punched through the barrier wall in places where the energy fluctuations were weakest. They jumped to systems the Council had surveyed and dismissed as worthless. Too hot, too cold, Too much radiation. Not enough resources. The galaxy was full of places that alien species had looked at and decided were not worth claiming. Humans moved in. The first colony was established on a planet the Council had classified as marginally habitable, no strategic value. It orbited a dim red star. The atmosphere was thin and acidic. The surface temperature averaged -20 degrees. The soil was almost entirely iron oxide. The humans named it New Carthage. Within a month, they had pressurized habitats running. Within 3 months, underground farms producing food. Within a year, a functioning city of 10,000 people. Governor Maria Torres ran the colony with practical efficiency. She was 43, a former Mars urban planner with dark eyes and the kind of competence that came from a lifetime of making things work in places where they should not have worked. The council wouldn't have believed it, she told Eleanor during a secure slip space communication. Their species needs centuries to establish a colony on a friendly world. We did it on a hostile one in months. Eleanor smiled. Humans don't need comfortable conditions. We need a problem to solve. Over 15 years, 47 colonies spread across the galactic frontier, each one on a world the Council had rejected, each one thriving, and the slip space drive connected them all. New Carthage to Asheville, 200 light years away in less than a minute. The diaspora was not a collection of isolated outposts. It was a single civilization spread across hundreds of light years, bound together by technology the rest of the galaxy did not have. Eleanor was 41 when she received the message that would change everything. She was in her office in Geneva reviewing reports from the colonies when the secure channel opened. Governor Torres's face appeared on the screen. Ambassador, we have a situation. Eleanor set down her coffee. What kind of situation? First contact, sort of. Torres looked like she was trying not to smile. We have a visitor. His name was Tradeclaw Methus, and he was not supposed to be there. Methus was a Sarathi, a reptilian species that stood about 7 feet tall with scales that shifted color with emotion. He was a merchant, not a successful one. His ship was old, his cargo was usually whatever he could afford, and his luck was consistently terrible. On the day that changed his life, he was running from pirates. 3 ships were chasing him through the outer frontier. His engine was failing, his shields were down. He was fairly certain he was about to die. He made a random jump to a system his chart said was empty. It was not empty. There was a city below him. New Carthage gleaming with lights on the dark surface of a frozen world, surrounded by the busy traffic of cargo shuttles and mining vessels. Methus stared through his viewport, his scales cycling through every shade of blue that meant astonishment. 2 human corvettes appeared beside his ship before he could react. He expected to die. Instead, a voice came through his communication system, speaking accented but understandable trade common. Unknown vessel, you have entered sovereign space. State your name and intentions. Methus's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I am Tradeclaw Methus of the Sarathi Free Merchants. I'm fleeing pirates. My ship is damaged. I mean no harm. A pause. Then follow us in. We'll see to your ship. They brought him down to the surface. They repaired his engine with materials he did not recognize. They gave him food that was strange but edible. They patched his hull. They treated a wound on his arm that he had gotten during the pirate attack and had not mentioned. They asked him questions about where he had come from and what he knew about the region, and they answered some of his questions in return. Methus was not a fool. He understood immediately what he was looking at. These were humans, the species the Council had locked behind a barrier wall 50 years ago, the species that was supposed to be trapped in its own solar system, slowly declining into irrelevance. They were not trapped. They were here. They had a city. They had ships. They had technology he did not recognize. They were thriving. When his ship was repaired and ready to leave, Governor Torres came to see him personally. She stood in front of him and studied him with the directness he would come to learn was typical of humans. You've seen something no one in the galaxy knows about, she said. I'm not going to threaten you. That's not how we do things. But I'm asking you to keep this secret, at least for now. We're not ready to be found. Methus's scales shifted to pale yellow, uncertainty. Why did you help me? You could have destroyed my ship and no one would have known. Torres looked at him with an expression he could not read at first. Then he realized what it was. Kindness. Because you needed help, she said. And where we come from, that's reason enough. Methus kept the secret for 3 months. Then he told his cousin. His cousin told a friend. That friend told someone else. The Sarathi had been members of the Galactic Council for 2,000 years. In all that time, they had never been treated as anything more than useful servants. The big species made the decisions. The small species followed along and were grateful for scraps. Methus had family, he had friends, he had an entire community of merchants who were barely surviving in a galaxy that did not value them. And he had just discovered a civilization that had treated him with more kindness in a single day than the Council had shown his people in 2 millennia. Within 6 months, the first Sarathi trading vessel arrived at New Carthage requesting permission to trade. The Shadow Alliance began there. The Sarathi brought star charts, intelligence about council politics and military deployments, rare elements that were abundant in developed systems but scarce on the frontier. Humans provided advanced materials, medical technology, and something even more valuable: respect. For the first time in their history, the Sarathi were doing business with a species that treated them as equal partners. Other species followed, the Valith silicon-based beings who lived in deep space, the Umari aquatic species with advanced underwater technology, the Neth, a fungal collective intelligence the Council had classified as non-sentient for 800 years, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. One by one, they found their way to the diaspora, and Eleanor coordinated it all, from Earth managing secret diplomatic channels, building networks of trust, ensuring that the alliance remained hidden. She was 75 now. Her hair had gone completely white. She needed reading glasses for the first time in her life. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and she understood what they were building. Not just an escape from the cage, a revolution. Mira was 53, one of the chief engineers on the Exodus Fleet project. Eleanor had watched her daughter grow from that 4-year-old asking about aliens to this brilliant woman who was building humanity's future one ship at a time. She called her mother on the secure channel after a particularly long shift. "We're almost ready," she said. Her face on the screen was tired but excited. "Another year, maybe 2. Then we can start moving the fleet into position." Eleanor smiled. "Your father would have been proud." Mira's expression softened. Her father had died 10 years ago. Heart attack. He had never lived to see what his daughter built. "I wish he could have seen this," Mira said quietly. "He did," Eleanor replied. "Every time he looked at you." After the call ended, Eleanor sat in her office and looked at the reports on her desk. 50 colonies now, 300 warships, 200,000 humans living outside the solar system. And the Council had no idea. The whispers started small. In the outer frontier, stories began to circulate. Strange ships that appeared out of nowhere. Colonies on worlds that should have been empty. A new species building something in the dark. At first, the whispers were easy to ignore. The frontier was always full of rumors. Pirates and smugglers saw things that were not there all the time. But the whispers kept coming. More specific. More consistent. In the Grand Convocation Chamber overmind, Kelvithus processed the reports and dismissed them. The barrier wall was the most advanced piece of technology in the galaxy. No species had ever broken through one. Certainly not the humans. The whispers were nothing. Background noise. Not worth investigating. This was Kelvithus's first mistake. In her office in Geneva, Eleanor received a coded message from the Sarathi Intelligence Network. Council patrol activity increasing in outer frontier sectors. They're investigating the rumors. How long until we're ready? Eleanor looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed a reply. "Soon. Tell our people to be careful, and tell Admiral Okoye to prepare the fleet. When the Council finds us, we need to be ready." She sent the message and sat back in her chair. 50 years. 50 years of building and planning and preparing. It was almost time. Outside her window, the lights of Geneva sparkled against the darkness. Beyond them, invisible but very real, the barrier wall still surrounded humanity's prison. But not for much longer. Eleanor thought about that first day in the Grand Convocation Chamber. Standing alone on that circle of light, 400 species looking down at her. She had been 26 then, afraid but determined. Now she was 75, still afraid, still determined. And she was not alone anymore. She had 50 colonies. She had 300 warships. She had allies across the galaxy who were tired of being told they did not matter. Most importantly, she had proven something the Council had never believed. Humanity did not need their permission to be free. Humanity had never needed anyone's permission. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson, and Eleanor Hart intended to be there when it did. The patrol consisted of 2 Thorellan frigates, standard reconnaissance configuration. Nothing special, just another routine sweep of the outer frontier checking systems that the charts said were empty. Commander Sethrak was not expecting to find anything. In 300 years of service to the hive mind, he had conducted these patrols hundreds of times. Empty systems stayed empty. That was the natural order of things. When the sensors detected activity in the asteroid belt, his first assumption was mining debris, natural phenomena, solar wind disturbing dust clouds. His second assumption was pirates. His third assumption never had time to form, because what the sensors showed him was impossible. 3 human cargo ships, a processing platform, ore containers being loaded with methodical efficiency, infrastructure that should not exist in a system that was supposed to be abandoned. Sethrak sent a demand for identification. His voice carried the authority of the Council and 12,000 years of galactic law. The response came from 4 points in space he had not detected until they were already there. 4 human corvettes materialized around his frigates, not approaching, not jumping in from a distance, simply appearing at distances measured in tens of meters so close that the proximity alarms screamed and the tactical displays went white with threat warnings. A human voice spoke through the communication channel. It was calm, polite, and carried the kind of certainty that made Sethrak's compound eyes widen in recognition of what he was facing. The Relin vessels, you have entered sovereign human space. You are not authorized to be here. You may leave peacefully. We encourage you to do so. You will not be given a second offer. Sethrak was 300 years old. He had commanded ships in border disputes and peacekeeping operations. He knew when he was looking at a losing position. 4 ships at point-blank range. Technology he had never seen before. Weapons locked and ready. He gave the order to withdraw. His frigates turned and ran, and the human corvettes simply watched them go. On the bridge of the Silent Thunder, Admiral James Okoye sat in his command chair and let out a long, slow breath. His tactical officer, a young woman named Kai Thorne, who looked at him with wide eyes, spoke first. They'll report this. Yes, Okoye said. The Council will know we're here. Yes. What do we do? Okoye looked at the stars on the tactical display. Somewhere out there, 400 species were about to learn that the humans they had locked away and forgotten were not only free, but had been building an empire in the darkness right under their noses. We get ready, he said quietly, because what comes next will be the fight of our lives. He paused. A tired smile crossed his face, hard and bright, like sunlight on steel. But we've been getting ready for a long time. The message reached the Grand Convocation Chamber at midday Galactic Standard Time. It destroyed the galaxy's peace of mind in 30 seconds. A Thorellan scout patrol had encountered human ships, not inside the barrier wall, outside it, on the frontier. The humans had warships, advanced technology, hidden colonies. The barrier wall had been breached. The humans were free. For the first time in anyone's memory, the convocation chamber was silent. Not the polite, ordered silence that preceded debate. A stunned, airless silence. The silence of 400 species trying to process something that should have been impossible. Overmind Kelvithus processed it faster than most. The hive mind accessed every scrap of intelligence about the frontier. Every dismissed rumor, every ignored sighting, every strange report that had been filed and forgotten over the past 20 years. The pattern was obvious now. The humans had not just escaped. They had been out there for decades. Building, growing, spreading through the galaxy like roots through soil, right under the Council's collective nose. Kelvithus felt something the hive mind had not experienced in over 1,000 years. It took several seconds to identify the emotion because it was so unfamiliar. Embarrassment. The overmind crushed the feeling immediately. There was no time for such things. The situation was clear. A species sentenced to permanent isolation had broken free using technology the Council did not possess. That species now controlled an unknown number of systems, had an unknown number of ships, had been forming alliances with disaffected Council members. This was not an inconvenience. This was a threat to the entire galactic order. The emergency session lasted 4 days. Some species argued for negotiation. Perhaps the humans could still be brought into compliance. Perhaps the situation could be resolved peacefully. Others pointed out that the humans had already been offered compliance once. They had chosen exile instead. A species that stubborn was unlikely to change its mind. Kelvithus's position was simple and direct. The humans had to be stopped. Not negotiated with, not reasoned with. Stopped. If they were allowed to continue expanding, if their technology spread, if their ideas about freedom and independence infected more species, the Council's authority would collapse. 12,000 years of galactic order would fall apart. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Council authorized a purification fleet, 10,000 warships drawn from 12 species. Led by the Theralan hegemony, their mission was equally decisive. Find the human colonies, destroy the human fleet, force humanity back behind the barrier wall, or if that proved impossible, destroy them entirely. The fleet assembled at Cathar Station, a massive military complex at the edge of Council space. It was the largest military force the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. The Rellan dreadnoughts, each one 5 kilometers long, Mokari swift ships, Sereth battle fortresses, Orathi gas weapon carriers, ships from 8 other species, all of them eager to prove their loyalty to the Council, all of them eager to prove their value in the coming fight. At the head of the fleet aboard the dreadnought, absolute certainty over Mind Kelvithus directed operations personally. The fleet moved toward the frontier, a procession of warships so vast it took 6 hours to pass through a single transit point. Ahead of them, scout ships mapped the route in search for human positions. They did not find much. That should have worried them more than it did. On New Carthage, in a command center buried deep beneath the frozen surface, Eleanor Hart stood before a wall of displays showing tactical data from across the frontier. She was 76 years old. Her white hair was pulled back in a simple braid. Her hands lined with age spots and years of work rested on the edge of the console. Behind her, Governor Torres stood with a tablet showing casualty projections and fleet dispositions. The Sarathi network confirms departure from Cathar Station, Torres said. 10,000 ships. They're well in command. They'll reach the rift in 72 hours. Eleanor did not take her eyes off the displays. Has Admiral Okoye been informed? Yes, he's assembling his commanders now. Eleanor nodded slowly. She had known this moment was coming for 50 years. Since she stood in that chamber and said no to the most powerful beings in the galaxy, every decision since then had led here. Open a channel to the fleet, she said, all ships. I want to address them. Torres worked the controls. A light on the console turned green. Eleanor took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was transmitted to every human warship, every colony, every station in the diaspora. This is Ambassador Eleanor Hart. 50 years ago, I stood before the Galactic Council and made a choice. I chose freedom over safety. I chose who we are over who they wanted us to be. Today you defend that choice. You fight for every person who ever refused to kneel, for every dream that was worth more than survival, for every child who deserves to grow up with their mind intact. The Council thinks we're a threat because we won't obey. They're right to be afraid. Not because we're violent, but because we're free, and freedom once tasted spreads like fire. Show them what free people can do. The channel closed. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and looked at Torres. Now we wait. Aboard the Defiance, Admiral Okoye stood before 40 commanders in the ship's briefing room. The holographic display between them showed the Cathar Rift and the approaching Council fleet. 10,000 ships, Okoye said. On. His voice was calm, professional, like he was discussing weather patterns instead of their potential extinction. The Theralan dreadnoughts are the main threat. Each one carries enough firepower to sterilize a continent. They're also slow. They rely on centralized command through the hive mind, and their point defense systems are designed to counter threats that come through normal space, not slip space. He gestured and the display zoomed in on a single dreadnought rotating to show firing arcs and blind spots. We have 2,000 ships. We are outnumbered 5 to 1. In a straight fight, we lose. So we're not going to have a straight fight. The strategy was built on the single advantage humanity possessed: the slip space drive. Every human ship could jump anywhere in real time. Not through fixed lanes, not along predicted routes. Anywhere. Standard fleet tactics meant nothing against that capability. You could not predict where human ships would appear. You could not set up firing lines against an enemy that might materialize behind you. You could not coordinate a fleet when your opponent could be everywhere and nowhere at once. Okoye had studied every naval battle in human history, every recorded galactic engagement. He had identified a consistent pattern in Council military thinking. They fought in formations. They relied on coordination from Central Command. They expected their enemies to do the same. Humanity was going to fight like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The Purification Fleet arrived at the Cathar Rift and found the human fleet waiting. 2,000 ships in a loose, disorganized cluster. No formation, no defensive screen, no obvious structure. To Kelvithus, observing through the sensors of 100 ships simultaneously, it looked like chaos. It looked like amateurs. The Overmind ordered the attack. The Theralan dreadnoughts advanced in standard assault formation. A wall of heavy ships with lighter vessels screening the flanks. Behind them, the Melkari swift ships prepared for flanking maneuvers. The Sureth battle fortresses anchored the center. It was textbook, practiced. It had worked against every enemy the Council had faced in 12,000 years. The first wave of weapons fire tore through the space where the human fleet had been, but the human fleet was no longer there. 2,000 ships blinked out of existence simultaneously. For exactly 1.7 seconds, Council sensors showed nothing. Then 2,000 ships blinked back into existence, scattered throughout the Council formation. Inside it, among the dreadnoughts, between the escorts, behind the flagships, and they opened fire. The effect was devastating. On the bridge of the Defiance, Okoye watched the tactical display light up with engagement markers. His ship had appeared 30 meters from a Thorellan dreadnought's shield generator array. "Weapons free," he said calmly. "Missiles away, energy weapons cycling." The dreadnought's shields flared and buckled under point-blank fire from angles they were never designed to cover. "Jump," Okoye said. The Defiance vanished, reappeared 200 kilometers away beside a Melkari swift ship. "Fire." The pattern repeated. Fire, jump, fire again. No waiting for orders, no checking with command. 2,000 captains making split-second decisions. 2,000 crews executing with the precision that came from years of training for exactly this moment. In the fighter bay of the carrier, indomitable Lieutenant Kai Thorne strapped into her cockpit and felt her hands shake. She was 28 years old. She had trained her entire adult life for this. But training and reality were different things. The launch klaxon sounded. Her fighter shot into space and immediately into chaos. Ships everywhere, human corvettes blinking in and out of existence, Council vessels firing in all directions. The void lit up with weapons fire and explosions and the brilliant flare of shields failing. "Storm Squadron, form on me," her squadron leader's voice came through the comm. "Target those Melkari interceptors. Stay tight." Kai's hand stopped shaking. The training took over. Throttle forward, target lock. Weapons hot. A Melkari interceptor crossed her field of view. Elegant, fast, already turning to engage. She did not give it the chance. Her fighter's cannon spoke, and the Melkari ship came apart in a brilliant flash of atmosphere, venting into vacuum. No time to think about it. The next target was already there. Deep in the Defiance's engineering section, Sienna Reeves watched her displays with the kind of focus that blocked out everything else. She was 35 years old, born on Titan, raised in the shadow of the evacuation that had killed 17 people. She had spent her entire career making sure systems did not fail. The Defiance shuddered as a plasma bolt connected with the shields. The power distribution network flexed and compensated. Capacitors discharged. Backup generators came online. "Shield strength at 87%, she called into her comm. "Heat sinks nominal. We're good." Another hit. Harder this time. 83%. Rerouting power from secondary systems. Her hands moved across the controls like a pianist playing a familiar piece. Every system on this ship was something she could rebuild in her sleep. Every connection, every power coupling. The shields would hold. She would make sure of it. Aboard the absolute certainty, Calvithas processed tactical data from 10,000 viewpoints simultaneously and felt something crack in the perfect certainty that had guided the Thorellan hegemony for 12,000 years. The coordination was collapsing. The hive mind tried to adapt, sending new orders to every ship simultaneously, adjusting formations, compensating for the chaos. But the humans were not fighting like any enemy Calvithas had ever faced. There was no central command to target, no flagship to destroy, no coordination to disrupt, because there was no coordination to begin with. Just 2,000 independent units, each one thinking for itself, each one finding opportunities and exploiting them faster than any hive mind could process. And then human electronic warfare systems flooded the battlefield with noise. Communication frequencies jammed, sensor readings degraded. The perfect information flow that was the Thorellan hegemony's greatest strength dissolved into static and confusion. For the first time in its existence, Overmind Calvithas felt something it had no name for. Doubt. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Thorellan dreadnoughts, for all their massive firepower, were slow. Built for long-range combat, human corvettes danced around them like insects around sleeping giants, striking at engines, sensor arrays, weapon systems. One by one, the great ships were blinded, crippled, not destroyed quickly. Dreadnoughts were too tough to kill easily, but a blind, crippled dreadnought was no longer a threat. It was an obstacle. The Melkari swift ships put up a harder fight, faster, more adaptable. But they relied on the FTL lane network for rapid repositioning. Human ships did not need lanes. Every time a Malkari squadron jumped to a new position, human corvettes were already there. Having jumped through slip space to the same coordinates seconds earlier, waiting, the Seraph battle fortresses were nearly indestructible, but they were also incredibly slow. Human ships simply flowed around them like water around rocks and focused on more vulnerable targets. When it was over, the Council fleet had lost 3,800 ships, destroyed, crippled, unable to fight. The human fleet had lost 340. Every loss hurt. On New Carthage, Eleanor watched the casualty reports come in and felt each one like a knife. 340 ships, approximately 5,000 people. 5,000 people who had been alive that morning, who had families, dreams, futures, gone. She sat down in her chair and allowed herself 60 seconds to grieve, to feel the weight of the decision she had made 50 years ago and every consequence that had flowed from it. Then she stood up and got back to work. Because 5,000 people had died to protect the freedom of billions, and she would not let their sacrifice be meaningless. Admiral Okoye gave the order personally. All ships, the enemy is retreating. Do not pursue. I repeat, do not pursue. Let them go. On a dozen bridges, captains who had their blood up and their weapons hot hesitated, then obeyed. The Council fleet ran, not in an orderly withdrawal, in a scramble. Thousands of damaged ships fighting to reach the nearest FTL lane and escape. The humans watched them go. Why, Kai Thorne asked her squadron leader as they formed up for the flight back to the carrier. We could finish them. Because we're not here to slaughter, came the reply. We're here to win, and we just did. The news spread across the galaxy in days. The Council had not just lost a battle, they had lost the idea that they were unbeatable. For 12,000 years, no species had challenged the Council's military and won. The Purification Fleet was supposed to have been overwhelming. It was supposed to have crushed the humans and restored order. Instead, a species that had been exiled and forgotten had shattered the largest fleet in 3 millennia with a force 1/5 its size. The effect on Council member species was immediate and profound. The Sarathi declared their alliance with humanity openly. They pulled their merchant fleets from Council trade routes and redirected them to the diaspora. The Valith announced they would block Thorellan supply lines through their deep space territories. The Umari shut down the underwater data relay networks that half the galaxy's communications depended on. 3 other minor species sent delegations to New Carthage within a week. A dozen more began quiet negotiations through Sarathi intermediaries. The Council was not just losing a military conflict, it was losing its grip on the galaxy. Admiral Okoye did not give the galaxy time to recover. 2 weeks after the Battle of Cathara Rift, the human fleet, reinforced by Sarathi cruisers and Valith crystal ships, began advancing toward the heart of Council space. Not in a straight line, not through the FTL lanes the Council could monitor and defend, through slip space, appearing in system after system without warning, bypassing every defensive position the Council tried to establish. They did not attack civilian targets, did not bomb planets or destroy infrastructure. They disabled military installations, knocked out weapons platforms, and moved on. In every system they entered, they broadcast a single message. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to harm. We are here because the Galactic Council decided 50 years ago that humanity did not deserve to be free. They were wrong about that, and they were wrong about all of you. The message spread, and with it spread something the Council had worked 12,000 years to suppress: hope. 3 months later, the final jump brought the fleet to Valtheris Prime. 2,000 human warships dropped out of slip space in perfect formation around the Council's seat of power. Behind them came 300 Sarathi cruisers, their hulls gleaming with human composite armor. 100 Valith crystal ships, translucent and beautiful, catching the light of the neutron star. And ships from a dozen other species, all of them flying alongside humanity for the first time. At the center of the fleet, small and unarmed and completely alone, was a single diplomatic shuttle. Inside, Eleanor Hart put on credentials she had not worn in 50 years. The pin was tarnished, the lanyard was frayed, but the name was still readable. Ambassador Eleanor Hart, United Earth Coalition. She looked at herself in the small mirror. White hair, lined face, the weight of 7 decades visible in every feature, but her eyes were the same sharp brown they had always been. She straightened her shoulders and stood the same way she had stood 50 years ago. She sent a message to the Grand Convocation Chamber. This is Ambassador Eleanor Hart of the United Earth Coalition. I believe I have a standing invitation to address the chamber. I would like to accept that invitation now." The chamber looked exactly the same. The same towering rows of seats, the same cold lights, the same echoing silence, the same 400 species looking down from their high places, the same circle of white light at the very bottom. Eleanor stepped onto that circle and felt the years collapse. But there were differences. The Sarathai section was dark, empty. They were outside in human ships as allies. The Valith section was empty too, and the Umari, and scattered seats from a dozen species who had left the Council in the weeks following Cathara Rift. The chamber that had once been full to overflowing now had gaps in it like a mouth with missing teeth. And when the 400 species looked at her now, they did not look with contempt or pity or comfortable certainty. They looked with fear. Good, Eleanor thought. Fear means they're paying attention. The protocol master activated the translation system. The chamber recognizes Ambassador Eleanor Hart of the human species. The ambassador may address the council. Eleanor took a breath. Thank you. It has been a long time since I stood in this room. 50 years. I was younger then. The galaxy was different then. Or perhaps it was not different at all, and I simply did not understand it as well as I do now. She paused, let the words settle. 50 years ago, I came here to ask for membership. You told me no. You told me my species was too violent, too fractured, too unpredictable, too human. You offered me an alternative. The compliance protocols, neural harmonization, 500 years of supervision, and at the end of that, you would reconsider our application. Not approve it, reconsider it. Her voice was steady, strong. It filled the chamber. I refused. You sealed us behind a barrier wall. You expected us to suffer, to weaken, to come crawling back ready to accept any terms you offered. Some of you, I think, expected us to die. She looked up at the tears of alien faces. We did not die. We did not crawl. We did not kneel. Instead, we did what humans have always done when pushed into a corner. We adapted. We invented. We built. We took the prison you gave us and turned it into a workshop. We studied the barrier wall you built to contain us and learned more about space-time physics from that wall than your scientists learned in 12,000 years. Then we broke through it. She took a step forward, just one step. But in that enormous room, it felt like an earthquake. We built colonies on worlds you threw away. We made homes in places you said nothing could live. We found allies among species you ignored and mistreated and forgot. And when you sent 10,000 warships to destroy us, we broke them. Not because we're stronger than you, not because we're smarter, but because we're free. Because every single person in that fleet was fighting with their own mind, their own courage, their own judgment. You cannot defeat a species that thinks for itself. The silence was absolute. But I did not come here to gloat, Eleanor continued, her voice softer now. I did not come to threaten. I did not come to demand your surrender. I came to propose something better. Something this galaxy has never tried in 12,000 years of civilization. She pulled a small data tablet from her jacket. It looked insignificant in her aged hand. The compact of open stars. The details are here and I will share them with every delegation. But the principles are simple. She held up one finger. First, no species will ever again be forced into compliance. Neural harmonization is banned. Every species in this galaxy has the right to think its own thoughts and make its own choices. That right is not negotiable. A second finger. Second, all barrier walls everywhere in the galaxy will be dismantled. No species will ever again be caged. The stars belong to everyone. A third finger. Third, trade and travel between all systems will be free and open. No more controlled lanes, no more restricted access. The galaxy is too big and too beautiful to be divided into territories and kept behind fences. A fourth finger. Fourth, this council as it currently exists will dissolve. In its place, we propose the assembly of free worlds. Participation will be voluntary. Decisions will be made by consensus. Every voice will carry equal weight. Every species from the greatest to the smallest will have a seat. She lowered her hand. And fifth, humanity will not lead this assembly. We will participate in it. We will contribute to it. We will defend it if threatened. But we will not rule it. We have seen what happens when one species decides it knows what is best for everyone else. We have been on the receiving end of that decision. We will not make the same mistake. The Melkari delegate rose. Its crystalline structure caught the light. You have the power to take whatever you want. Your fleet surrounds this station. You could destroy us. Why offer terms? Eleanor looked up at the being and answered with simple honesty. Because destroying you would make us exactly what you accused us of being. We spent 50 years proving you wrong. We are not going to undo that now. The Melkari sat down without another word. Hours of debate followed. Eleanor stood through all of it, answered every question, never raised her voice, never made threats. She was just an old woman who had come a long way to say something important. Finally, after the other voices had exhausted themselves, Kelvithus spoke. Ambassador Hart. The Overmind's voice was cold and precise as always. 50 years ago, I told you your species was unfit for galactic civilization. Violent, fractured, dangerously unpredictable. I was correct. These are facts supported by your history and by the events of the past 50 years. Eleanor waited. However, there was something in the Overmind's voice that had never been there before. Something that sounded almost like reluctance. I did not account for the possibility that these qualities might also be strengths. I did not predict that a species locked in isolation would use that isolation to surpass the technology of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. I did not predict that a species known for internal conflict would unite with such purpose. I did not predict that a species offered the chance to dominate would instead offer to share. 10,000 green eyes blinked in the darkness. You are not what we predicted. Eleanor looked up at the Overmind and allowed herself a small, tired smile. We never are. 11 seconds of silence, Eleanor counted them. Each one felt like a year. The Thorellan hegemony will accept the compact of open stars, Kelvithus said at last. We will participate in the assembly of free worlds, as equals. The last word came out hard, as if it cost the Overmind something to say it. Perhaps it did. 12,000 years of supremacy ended in a single word. The chamber erupted. 400 species. Some cheering, some wailing, some flickering with bioluminescent patterns, some vibrating with sound that transcended anything human ears could hear. Eleanor stood in the center of it all and let the sound wash over her. It was done. That evening, after the ceremonies and the ratifications and the endless negotiations over details, Eleanor stood on the observation deck of Valthera Station and looked out at the stars. She heard footsteps behind her, turned to see Tradeclaw Methus walking toward her across the deck. He was old now for a Sarathi. His scales had faded from bright green to soft gray-green. He moved more slowly than he once had, but when he saw her, his scales flickered with warm amber. Affection. Ambassador, he said. Methus. Eleanor smiled. I thought you would be celebrating with the others. I was, but I wanted to find you first, to thank you. Thank me for what? For this. He gestured at the stars at the station, at everything. When I found your people on New Carthage, I was a failed merchant running from pirates. You fed me. You fixed my ship. You asked for nothing in return. I did not understand it then. I think I understand it now. What do you understand? That it was never about strength for you. Not really. Not even the fleet or the technology or the slip space drive. Those were tools. The real thing, the thing that changed the galaxy, was simpler than that. You treated everyone you met as if they mattered, as if their freedom was as important as your own, as if the galaxy was big enough for all of us. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the stars and her eyes were bright. They told me we were too human, she said. They were right about that last part. She turned to Methus and grinned in, not the diplomatic smile of an ambassador, a real grin, wide and bright and full of something that had no name in any language, but meant joy and pride and the fierce satisfaction of a species that had refused to be anything other than itself. And it was the best thing about us all along. Methus looked at this old human woman standing in front of a galaxy she had helped to free, and he laughed. He laughed until his scales turned bright gold, the color that meant pure happiness. And Eleanor laughed with him. Below them, the grand convocation chamber stood empty and dark. It would never be used in quite the same way again. Above them, the stars burned on, as they always had, as they always would. And between those stars, on 1,000 worlds and in 1,000,000 ships, beings of every shape and size and kind were waking to a new day in a galaxy that was for the first time in 12,000 years truly free. They had exiled humanity to teach it obedience. Instead, they had taught it to be unstoppable, and the galaxy was better for it.